You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm joined today by Gina Bianchini, who has started Mighty Networks, which really takes community to the next level. And community is a buzzword that's used pretty heavily. But, the reality is most folks, whether they're brands or entertainers, they don't really fully tap into community. So I wanted to learn about the backstory to Mighty Networks, but also just learn what the folks who are truly taking advantage of community are doing right. So what was the backstory to Mighty Networks? What was the catalyst that had you say, there's something missing in the marketplace and I can build it?
Yeah. So just to take a step back, Mighty Networks is a platform, a new kind of, we think about it as a new kind of no-code community platform where the whole goal is to enable entrepreneurs, creators, and brands the ability to harness the power of content and community together in one place to create new cultures. I'm obsessed with community and not obsessed with the buzzword and the buzzword hand wavy definition. I have a very specific definition of what I'm obsessed with, which is how do you build communities such that you can connect members to each other in the most natural, the most valuable, and the most interesting ways, such that the network, the community, the network gets more valuable to every member with each new person who joins and contributes. So the reason I think this is so important is because if you take a step back, community is the single most effective way in the world to navigate rapid change, navigate transitions, navigate the world when it's moving kind of as fast as it is moving, which, as we know, is the world we live in today, and it's not going anywhere. Number two, a community is so amazing and so effective at helping people build new practices, changing habits, and essentially creating the life, the career, the relationship to their health, the relationship to other important interests that they want to have in the world. And ultimately, what that means is that people can, through community, achieve results and transformation that they just simply can't get on their own. So this is all sort of a long-winded way of saying, we are fundamentally, as human beings, made for community. As individuals, we have a very limited amount of self-discipline, a very limited amount of energy, and communities and interacting and building things and innovating with other people is an infinite source of energy, creativity, problem solving, and ultimately realizing our fullest potential. And so I started working in this world of community, going all the way back to the first platform I created called Ning, which gave people a way to create their own social networks back in 2007. We grew it to over 90 million, nearly 100 million users around the world. 3 million Ning networks were created, 300,000 active on a monthly basis. And when I left and we sold the company, I looked around and I was like, I'm not done. I'm only getting started with this obsession of like, how do we utilize and harness the power of technology to realize and create communities that ultimately, you can create, bring people together, and they have not just a fun experience, but a transformational one. And what would be needed in that? And then for members, if we get this right, it means that when somebody joins a community, what they are able to do as a result of that is profound in their lives, profound in the lives of other members, profound in the lives that if you think about it, when they come out of the community, who they touch and how they show up in the world. And so our vision for Mighty Networks is, when we look to the world we want to live in, we want a world where there are millions of unique and vibrant, colorful communities mastering something interesting and important together through not just chat or a feed, but through online courses and through memberships and through collaborations and things that can be unlocked when software can play the role of phenomenal host. So Kevin, as you create something where you start to invite people in, imagine a world where the software actually connects the most relevant members. It breaks the ice. It plays that role when you show up at a party and you don't really know anybody, of the host who comes in and is like, oh my God, it's so great to have you here. The reason I invited you to this party is because I really want you to meet Gina. She's awesome. You guys are going to have a lot in common. So what happens there? Your ability to get value from that network goes up dramatically. And it's, and also in this model, you don't have to do all the work, which I think there are a lot of other places, certainly with just the content conveyor belt of social media, where there's just this expectation. It's like everybody has to have zillions of pieces of content every single day, and it has to be native to every platform. And my jaw is regularly on the ground relative to what we could all be doing, which is spending more and more time together with the most valuable people in the most valuable communities, all with that lens of how are we mastering something interesting or important together.
When a lot of folks think about communities, they think about the communities, the most successful communities as being the one where the passion index is highest, right? So obviously passion indices go really high around sports and houses of worship and other things that and in some cases, certain types of nonprofits, like animal rescue nonprofits, tend to index really high compared to other types of nonprofits in that category. So as a person is thinking about, how do I take perhaps a slightly less emotionally charged category and turn it into a community and deliver value to all the members, am I going to be using different tools? Am I going to be approaching the community a different way if it's a community of accountants as opposed to a community of animal lovers, right? And so how does one think through the best way to use the platform if the emotional triggers aren't as strong as a community would typically have?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. So certainly one lens on successful communities is through sort of intensity of passion. I almost feel though that that's sort of been blown out of proportion in this moment, because we have had 15 years of muscle memory that intensity equals value. Intensity equals value to the platforms that are keeping you on them for very long periods of time. So let's put that aside.
Yeah, they did a whole movie on that, right?
As one lens. Yeah, like as one lens. I'd like to offer a different lens on community and community value, which is, how does a community help what we call at Mighty your ideal member, the person who needs your community the most right now, ideally all caps, meaning, right now it's all in caps. So when you look at that, it really comes down to actually people in transitions and people with a very clear goal. So a lot of the best communities actually have clarity to them around what we call your big purpose. What is the motivation for that community? And actually a big purpose follows a really simple and specific formula. I or we, and then who you bring together. So who is that ideal member? So that if you're listening to me talk about a community, Kevin, I would say I or we bring together, creators and entrepreneurs and brands who are fascinated by the topic of community, for example. 2, and then the 2 line is, what are we going to do together? And it's replacing the way I sort of think about it is the generic learn, share, and grow, which doesn't mean anything to anybody anymore, with what is that specific thing that we are going to do? Well, in the case of the community that I run, 62,000 people of Mighty network, community curious and community designers and hosts, as we call them. But for us, it's about taking a simple 5-step formula, community design, and applying it to your interests, passions, and goals in terms of what you want to create a community around. So so that we can. That's the third piece. So you've got the first piece, which is who is your ideal member? Who are you going to serve? Second piece is, what are you going to do together so that people actually, you're building credibility at that moment with like, oh, well, what are we going to do? Oh, okay, got it. And then it opens somebody's brain up to, so that we can, which is, well, what am I going to get for being in the community? What are the results and transformation that my participation, so not just my joining, but my contribution, what am I going to get from this community? And so when you answer those three pieces of, again, this big purpose formula, you have a incredibly valuable community to the people that you're serving. So coming back to, I personally, I think I married an accountant. I think accountants are fantastic and phenomenally interesting. And also I have seen really successful accountant-based communities. Now, what we want to get to is, well, so which kind of accountant in what stage of their career? Because again, communities, people are the most motivated to join communities at inflection points. So if you're, super happy, you've dialed in your career as an accountant, you may or may not need or want a community. But if you are basically like, I'm about to move from having 10 clients to scaling my accounting firm or my digital advertising agency to 50 clients, and what that looks like and what that means, you're probably pretty motivated at that point to meet up with and be in a community, one that has sort of a clear culture and clear value of the results and transformation that you would get, of other people who want that same thing or have that experience or are moving, we call it moving up the value journey. So what I would offer is a reframe away from passion alone. It's clarity in purpose. It's clarity in who you are bringing together in a community. And there are and what are those results in transformation that people are going to get for participating in it? And listen to how different that is than, well, what's really important is that we have engagement. What is engagement? Like, people are making up engagement. Engagement only matters to the extent that a community is unlocking identity, value, results, helping people achieve the goals that they want, helping them navigate that kind of transition that they're in. Let's get specific and let's get clear here, because then the ways that we can utilize and harness the power of community just increase, exponentially relative to this fuzzy, like, oh, my community is my social media following. It's not. That's an audience. And let's use very precise terms here. An audience is great. An audience is, I talk out at you, you talk back at me in my DMs. And because you have nobody else to talk to, guess who's doing all of the work? Me and my team. Versus, I am a host of a community where the value of the community is not more time with me, but because I am a great attractor and host of a community such that the value, the vast majority, I might produce something. I might go and be on a live stream. Sure. I might write something. I might host a course. But if I do this right, every thing I do in building a community and designing that community is about the value that you are going to get from other members and they are going to get from you.
That's a great way to frame it differently than the way the current social networks frame community or groups. One thing that it does seem to share in common, though, is that one tends to see that the more niche-y common purpose groups have a higher level of participation than the ones that sort of have a more fuzzy, all-inclusive mission, right? Where then it starts to drift away from where, like, not everyone is defining it the same way, or perhaps maybe their focus is a little bit less. So
yeah.
If someone's trying to decide how tightly to define those earlier steps in your framework, how niche do you go? Because if you go too niche, you've got a community of 12 people. If you go too broad,
Right.
You've got a bigger total available audience for your community, but you've gone too broad,
Yeah.
and the value then gets diluted.
Right. So I'm going to just take a step back because there's a number of awesome assumptions in there. Some are accurate, some are not. So number one, 12 of the right people that are going to help any one of those 12 people achieve results and transformation in their lives, because they're sharing stories, experiences, and ideas and they're navigating together a world that doesn't have a playbook, that doesn't have rules, that doesn't have, relevant 4,000 relevant SEO articles because they're all old. That's value. And so from where so on Mighty, we actually see that amongst successful high contribution rate communities, you don't need more than 30 people. 30 people is kind of a magic, it's a magic number. So when you also think about just those 12 people as well, one of the use cases that we see a lot of is high ticket courses. Think about if you go on a retreat, you don't want 100 people at the retreat. You'd love 12 people at a retreat, because what are you able to do? You're able to go deeper. So that's true for online communities as well. So that being said, the other thing that's beautiful about online and in real life communities that are, we think about serving both of those at Mighty, is that those 12 people, as they get results and transformation, they are able to then tell the story to the next 20 people, the next 100 people, the next 200. This is how social media got built in the first place. There was no place to advertise to join Facebook or Twitter or or any of the LinkedIn. It was all through, I'm going to invite my people are going to invite their people, and then the community is going to build the community's people. So I think that that's a really just important piece to kind of keep in mind. So is there such a thing as too niche? Maybe. I see many more communities that are dead on arrival by being too broad. And here's what happens. What happens is that the host of a community, so that's what we think is the right term. It's not even our term. It's the right term for somebody who's running and growing a community. The host of the community is like, my framework or it's so relevant to everybody. I don't want to limit, or I don't want to be exclusionary. Right. I want to be inclusive. So I want everybody, everybody to be a part of it. Well, here's the problem with that. Number one, if we go back to your big purpose, if I showed up and I was like, Kevin, I'm starting a community for all humans of planet Earth. Like, you're included in that, but it doesn't sound very relevant or very interesting. Now, let me change that to, Kevin, I'm starting a community where I'm bringing together smart, highly curious entrepreneurs who, I heard this earlier today, that want to add a zero to their revenue in the next 12 months. Now, you may or may not be in that ideal member group, but if you're not, you're like, I'm not, but you know what? I know who that person is. Right. And either I know those people or I don't know those people. And so what hosts of communities tend to forget, especially those that are just kind of getting started, it's not about you. It's not about your idea. It's about how your idea meets a set of people who have the opportunity and the potential to learn from each other, motivate each other, energize each other. And so if you make it too big, this is what, if you were to ask me what kills 99% of community ideas, and we certainly see this, when you're trying to get too big, too broad, it's abstraction. It's, I want to bring together all humans of planet Earth to learn, share, and grow together so that we can get better and have great lives. It's not going to, that's the worst. Compare that to a really clarity in who I'm bringing together, what we're going to do together, and what we're going to get for doing it. and you've got just something absolutely magical.
Yeah, I think the other thing I really like about the way you framed that is the people in those more niche groups are often more likely to know each other already, right?
Not necessarily. Not
No?
necessarily. And I would even say, if anything, niche doesn't mean small.
Okay.
Niche doesn't mean small. I would also say that niche doesn't mean small, it means specific. And the other thing is, niche doesn't have to mean identity. It can mean people at a certain transition. So for example, I bring together women who are navigating midlife in the Bay Area. Like, that's kind of interesting. Now, what makes that more interesting is, who are, dealing with grief, or who are making a career change, or like one of my favorite examples is like, if you are a young man who wants to explore a gap year after they graduate from high school and before they start college, like all of those are specific transitions. And so the power of community is, I don't have to know somebody already.
Right.
I don't have to know somebody already. So I believe, and I think this is really not very common to think about communities as the best solution for transitions, as opposed to like fandom or identity, or, who you are fundamentally as a person that doesn't ever change. There's a role for community there, but I think that the real interesting opportunity, especially for brands, is what transition do you want to own? What transition do you want to own? Which is a very different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and that's actually really great, because I could see community hosts initially being scared of the idea that people will sort of age out or transition out of the community because they've solved the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've had their gap year.
Yeah.
I mean, we had David's Bridal as a client for many years before their bankruptcy, and that's like hopefully only something that happens once, right? I mean,
right.
The reality is that sometimes it happens more than once.
They happen more.
There's a bunch of things relating to that life stage change, from the engagement to the planning of the wedding to the planning of the honeymoon, that is really just has unique needs associated with it, and then therefore might benefit from having a community. And under sort of a traditional construct, a person would be like, well, I don't want to do this because they think, oh, well, I'll lose everybody because they automatically age out, or they automatically solve their problem. But I think the point you made is that the need being so specific is actually a great thing for community.
That's right. Well, and then think about, again, we call it your value journey, which is what happens to somebody after they are through that transition. And what's interesting is, if you think about it through that lens, there are different paths you could take. So let's just take David's Bridal. You could imagine a world where David's Bridal has a program for people who want to become wedding planners. You could have, which by the way, not only would they would have brand, it's a little bit of a brand adjacency, but at the same point in time, totally interesting.
Absolutely.
You could even do a partnership with successful wedding planners and build a community with courses and memberships for that. You could also then think about, franchising that out, or thinking about how you grow, how do you take over that transition or expand it, where it's like, I think the Knot did this way back in the, 2000s, early aughts, which they went from being about weddings to being about, I think it was the Knot and the Nest, so how do they go on that journey with that bride, with that woman? And the thing about communities is that, one, they're extremely dynamic. They're very forgiving. They are a hotbed of experimentation. We call it workshopping. And you can start to see what are the needs of your customers, both in terms of going and getting more customers that look that way and have those same needs in that same transition. But then also, how do you stay with that person as they become who they are and live their life. And I think we've thought about that for brands in just far too of a narrow way.
Right.
It's a failure of modern business education, in my opinion.
Yes, well, I think that those businesses that are in those categories, perhaps they come into the category just assuming that they don't have a lifetime customer value because of the very narrow window of time that their, definition of the customer exists. But
right,
to
which worked, yeah, in the past. But we live in a highly dynamic, fluid, integrated digital and IRL world. And I think any brand that wants to grow and expand or even stay the course over the next decade is going to have to think about their customer, in this context and in this world. And the answer it's not going to be, I'm going to build engagement on social and have authentic conversations with them, because all of that is really BS. It's BS. Like, it is not valuable. How instead do you ask a different question, which is, how am I going to provide the most value to this person? And one of the tools in my toolbox, in my workshop, is the ability to connect that person to other people that they want to meet, that are going to help them think about the world in a different way, that's going to allow them to have focus, allow them to achieve their goals, allow them to have inspiration and look at the world in a vibrant and interesting way. The list just goes on and on.
So you talk about the host's role as the connector, right, of the people that belong in that community or should be considering that community. And there's obviously digital online connectivity, and then there's the resurgence of events, maybe not to the point of pre-pandemic, but events are sort of back on the table again as a way of having the community interact with each other. So how is Mighty helping that happen for people who would like to facilitate that in-person, face-to-face community, not just the digital version?
So a couple things. It's a great question. So number one, going back to your point as host is connector, we're not doing our job right on this podcast or in this conversation if the person who's listening to that is like, oh my God, that just sounds like more work. What is changing is that we are moving towards a world where a host of a community doesn't have to be the connector. The software can be the connector. And what they need to do is sort of define the rules of the game, define the community culture. Like, what are we doing here? How do we interact with each other? How do we provide the most value? Do we DM each other, or can I ask people for help, or what does that look like? And so it's the host as model of like the culture we're building in this community. And that's a highly scalable model, just to sound like
unlike the connector model by itself.
Unlike the connector model, or the content model for that matter. The content model does not scale. It feels like it might, because it's like, oh, I'll build a bigger and bigger audience, but it's a little bit like e-commerce, where it's like you have to go out and get them over and over and over again. A community is unique in the sense that while you are doing the things that you want to do, the value of the community is that the people in the community are connecting with each other. So that brings us to events, because events, we talk about online courses, experiences, challenges, and what we call collabs as being sort of the 4 kinds of community quests. Like, this is what people want to go do together. So the return of events is fantastic. It's great. Now, I say that with one tweak, which is that the fundamental flaw of events that we have an opportunity to change in this next chapter is when you show up at an event, how do you know who you're going to meet? So going back, this is an online problem. This is a IRL problem, which is, unless you are standing next to somebody at the buffet line over lunch, how are you meeting anybody? How are you quote unquote networking? So then what you do at a conference so you have one of two choices. Either you are trying to meet new people, and then that's like really stressful, really awkward. And like the quality on that is completely random. Or you go with your friends and you spend your whole time with your friends. But the idea, like, hopefully as we are, reemerging in the world, we're looking at the fact that nobody wants to sit in a dark room. No one wants to pay thousands of dollars and sit in a dark room to listen to something that the person on the stage knows is going to be something that is going to be out on the internet. So they're not going to say the most controversial thing because so it's like, well, why am I sitting in a dark room? And by the way, the last time that I was at a conference, everybody's on their phone anyway. So what are we doing? So I think having a lot more, being very intentional about what you're doing, why you're doing it, where you're doing it, what are the, again, what's the culture we're going to build over the course of this day or over the course of 2 days? But, that's going to be hard for people. It's change. And it's like, look, if you've done the same event the same way, and it worked for a really long time, you're going to blame macroeconomic conditions. You're going to be focused more on sponsors and like what their experience is and how you can make more money from booths and all this stuff. And it's like, at the end of the day, we have this amazing opportunity to instead say, how do I connect people before they even get there? How do I make sure like that when you show up, Kevin, at that next conference, it's like, oh my gosh, Kevin, I'm so glad you're here. We spent a lot of time thinking about like the 3 other people that I want to make sure are here. And I've already talked to them and like, they're excited to have lunch with you or like whatever that is. We need to push. That was also like awkward. So you're like, oh, Gina, that doesn't sound very fun. But you know what I mean? Like, yeah. The point is we have this opportunity to say, let's start with a blank page. And we're seeing this at Mighty in terms of just some fascinating and awesome virtual conferences. And then what is happening in person is much more about how do we break out in small groups? Yeah. How do we how do we basically have activities where people are, the whole point of it is that because we're members of this community, we have the opportunity to get rid of all of that, like small talk and trying to figure out, is this person somebody that like is going to be valuable to me or that I'm going to be valuable to? We can figure that all out ahead of time so that when we show up, it's like, oh my gosh, Kevin, I can't believe we're meeting in person. This is awesome. And that the conversation then starts at a much deeper level or a more familiar or comfortable level, which is very different than like, again, we've all been there. It's like, I'm going to say something awkward to the person who's standing in line next to me for coffee. And I don't know why they're here. And I don't know. And as a result, I don't know why I'm here. And I did a survey before the pandemic about people in technology, like, started with my friends. I think like 200 people answered the survey, and it was all about, I just did it for my own, like, I was really curious. Was I the only person who hated going to conferences? Basically, was what it was. I'm not. There is huge opportunity to do something different. And I think, somebody like, David Hornick, who runs something called the Lobby Conference, or the folks at Allen and Company with their conferences, or I think there's something really cool. I've never been, but like this thing called Silicon Slopes that the Lion Tree folks put on. There are different kinds of experiences. I think the big, 90s era CES kind of vibe. I don't know. It's gonna live on for inertia reasons, not because it's highly valuable.
Yeah, I think about the scenario.
I'm sure some person just was like, I vehemently disagree, but that's what makes this fun.
But what I liked about the way in which the Mighty framework intersects with the concept of the events and the networking at events is if you knew the person next to you had a similar purpose, vision, or mission, right? You've sort of already narrowed down your talking points. to where you already understand the commonality is there, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if it's totally random, the chances of you having a positive interaction are like, it's like buying a lottery ticket. Like, you don't want to do that 20 times a day, all day long for the events. And I think, the examples you gave of the better events, the attendees are pre-curated to more increase the chances that there's a common objective, right? And I think that has a lot to do with it, or at least
Yes.
a common passion or area of interest.
Yeah, it starts with people, not programming.
Yeah, right, exactly.
People, not programming.
And I feel like some of the event programmers have started to realize they're just putting the programming there as an excuse, because they know the only way that the T&E budget will be approved is that if they have an agenda with, big names and titles that sound like people learned something there, when in fact,
Right.
the real objective of the conference is the networking, right? And those contacts.
But if the programming is the thing people theoretically are paying for, the momentum there and the inertia there is around, again, how do we get everybody to sit in a dark room on their phone versus how are we connecting people to each other such that this becomes something that is not a nice to have, but a essential part of their annual calendar.
Yeah, I would love to see, more events start with the 10-minute sort of prep event, and then it turned into breakout sessions, right?
Yes.
And preferably breakout sessions where some kind of a logical framework was used to put me in, rather than random.
Yeah.
Because maybe
Right.
I'm in the same stage in my company, or I'm facing
That's
the
right.
same challenges or
Right.
whatever it is, right? And as long as the survey could be pre-filled out so that I ended up with the right people, that I'd pay double for, right? Because then it's not a
Yeah,
waste of
I think
money.
we just reinvented the events industry. Like you and me on this call, we just reinvented it.
Yeah.
But that thinking, but we have to question what has come before,
Right.
in order to build something that takes advantage of the fact that now we can connect people in these new kinds of communities, like we power on Mighty, and certainly I'm sure there are other platforms that do it as well. So that to me is what's so fascinating and cool about this next chapter.
Right. So clearly you're super jazzed about what you've built so far, and that it's there must be a product roadmap. Are there things that you've got coming out soon that you're able to talk about that you're excited about as well?
Well, so funny you should say that. Yes. So we are about to release in a few months what is going to be transformational for Mighty. And it takes all the great stuff that we've done and learned and really reframes what we want to be able to do with communities, and what our hosts and what members want to do with communities, and what communities are going to mean as we move forward, because it's evolving. And that's the beautiful thing about communities, is that they are dynamic. So stay tuned. There's a lot more great stuff. I'm going to keep you informed of it.
Please do.
But I am more excited now in this moment as I watch the fact that we are leaving the Facebook era behind us, and we are opening ourselves as we come out of this 2.5 years of bizarre pandemic, post-pandemic world. And I think while some things we're happy to kind of get back to, I think there are more things where we're like, how do I meet new people? How do I realize my full potential across the things that are most important to me? I don't want to live in one person's feed. I'm bored.
Yeah.
And I would argue and suggest that TikTok is the first post-boredom, like, I'm bored with social media, I'm on TikTok, and you just see the novelty and you see the excitement. I think there are truly millions of new communities that are going to be created, and with unique cultures, where as we give people these no-code tools to be able to combine online courses and community, or to define your community by chat and content, or to define your community by live streaming and chat, or just define your community by events, or an event plus live streaming plus chat plus, and you just start to like, what are the new cultures that are going to emerge from this moment and really usher in a new, highly creative, highly flexible world where each and every one of us don't just belong to one platform, but we belong to 3 or 4 communities that are equally important to us. And then we have others that we join and ebb and flow and leave as we go through life together, And I think that is, again, a very rich, colorful, energized future that we're working incredibly hard and are incredibly focused to bring to life.
So finally, since you've already got this new version in the works, what types of organizations and or people should be reaching out to you now to sort of use your current version and then be sort of in a good position to use the next version? Is it going to be brands or publishers or other passion organizations?
It's a great question. So we talk about our customer, our hosts, as we are building Mighty for entrepreneurs, for creators, for brands, and that those are pretty wide swaths on one level, but also across the board, this is about how are we helping people that have a point of view. They have a reason, to exist and a reason to bring people in. How do we make it even easier for each? And some of the brands on Mighty Networks and Creators, include everybody from Fortune to, who also actually put on fantastic conferences. Fortune, and I'm not just saying that because they're a customer. Fortune to Sports Illustrated to Mind Body to TED to Burning Man, and creators like Sophia Amoruso and some other ones that we are going to announce here shortly. Marissa Peer is pretty special as well. So when I look at who we're going to serve as we introduce, transformational products, it's not different people. It's how do we serve more and more people that have a big purpose, have a motivation for bringing people together and having just an outsized impact on people's lives.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing what you've got cooking, and thanks so much for sharing your vision with me and with the eMarketing Association community.
My pleasure.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.